From the Mayo Clinic Transform Conference in Rochester, hello, I'm Tom Weber. I'm pleased to have you here for a conversation on mental health from three important perspectives. Our talk focuses on a man from Wyoming named Andy Sandness, who had successful surgery a few years ago. It was the first face transplant here at Mayo, and it took more than 50 hours to complete. The surgery, though, was part of a much larger journey that Andy and the medical professionals around him have been on, including around mental health. So please welcome Andy Sandness, his surgeon Samir Mardini, and psychiatrist Sheila Josie Gregoire. Hi, Andy. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good to have you here. Dr.
Thank you.
Dr. Mardini.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. I'm going to start with you, Andy. This centers around you. And just briefly, we need to go back to 2006 for just a moment. What was happening in your life at that time?
Definitely was sad, depressed. I didn't have the communication skills that I have now. So looking back at that time in my life, it was rough, but you feel you hit rock bottom at that time. But then you realize after I've survived what I've been through, that wasn't even nearly as bad as what I had coming. Mm-hmm. And it was hard. I was sad. I was away from my friends, my family, for months at a time, and just didn't have nobody in my life that I just felt that I could talk to, or the right tools in place, such as a psychiatrist, psychologist, anything like that. So I think that's.
It came to this moment where you shot yourself, and you survived.
Yep. Which,
in and of itself, I think is amazing. Do you know how it is even that you were able to survive?
I always make a joke and say I'm a bad shot, but in all honesty, I think that there's, you live this life and you're on this planet for a purpose. And I haven't found my purpose yet, but I know that going through my journey, that there's something bigger out there than just myself. I've worked extremely hard to be where I'm at today. And I just plan on just continuing my life and living it the best that I can, and just trying to help people along the way. I'm not a savior by any rights, but there's certain messages that I have that I can convey to other people.
And obviously, we're here to talk about that today. At some point after this moment, you woke up. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering if you've ever thought about, was that first moment when you woke up and you realized that you'd survived, was your reaction, thank God, or was it, oh crap?
So it's really like a two-part answer. Just take me back in there, 2006. It's Christmas Eve, Christmas Day goes by. And I can't remember, I woke up, I think it was the 27th of December, I want to say. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget it my whole life. Laying there in bed, wake up, my sister by my side. My mom is just like squeezing my hand so stinking hard that my hand hurts. And I'm just like, okay, Mom, you gotta let up, it hurts. But she's sitting there, and I'll never forget that look in her face and the tears in her eyes and just the absolute hurt of what I had put her through. So in that moment when I woke up, it was just like, oh, thank God, thank God I'm alive, thank God I survived. But I will say, throughout the whole process, there's times when you think, man, gosh, it would just be so much easier if I didn't survive. But you have to take those thoughts and you put them to the side and you be like, you know what, you survived for a reason. There's a reason why you're here, and you just have to pick your head back up and just hope that you find the reason and you can just keep moving on. You find the right support system throughout, and just, your friends and family are there to help you along.
So Dr. Josie, at this point in the story, you hadn't met Andy, and you wouldn't for a couple more years. But what are you hearing in the story so far that really stands out and helps us to tell this story?
Well, it's such an important story, and I feel just listening to you, Andy, that you have found your purpose. You know, you're helping other people by being courageous enough to share this, so I want to thank you for that. It's devastating when this happens to a person, and it happens, to their whole family. And I was just looking at statistics about suicide, and for every person who successfully completes suicide, 135 people are affected. And they believe, based on this, that about 50% of all Americans are affected by suicide because of knowing somebody who's committed suicide. And for every person who commits suicide, there are many more who make the attempt. So it's so important that when people are feeling distressed and that they don't have ways to cope, that we as a society, as medical professionals, as people who care about others like Andy does, reach out with a message of hope. And so that's what I'm hearing today. And I think this is a very hopeful story of how you can go from a difficult place to being able to work your way through to being on a setting like this.
It's worth noting here that the man whose face would be part of the transplant, whose face you would one day have, Andy, was still alive at this point and would be for another decade. This was not an immediate, after the shooting, rush right into surgery. Dr. Mardini, in 2006, where was medicine in the world, specifically of face transplants? Because this still seems relatively new, right?
So the field of facial reconstruction has been around for a long time, and the first face transplant was actually performed at the end of 2005, so a year before this injury. And I happened to be on call for the Christmas time period when Andy came in, and the first question I had was, how do we proceed with this? Do we go ahead and do all these major reconstructions for someone who just attempted to do this, or do we need to get them stable and worked up and all this stuff? And we called Dr. Jowsey's colleagues at the time, and they recommended proceeding given Andy's particular situation. And I do remember you asked a question about whether you wanted to live or die. You told me, Andy, if this first happened, the fire person or the ambulance was somebody you knew, and you said, please, I want to live.
Yeah, that was, his name was Ryan. He was a police officer. I actually grew up with him. And at that time, when he came into the house after the gunshot, he was the first person there. And I'll never forget, he'd come upstairs up into my room and grab me, and he's like, hey, Andy, are you okay? Are you okay? And I looked at him and said, Ryan, he's holding me in his arms. And I just like, Ryan, please don't let me die. I don't want to die. Please don't let me die. And then that was just the message. I remember saying that throughout the cart going into the hospital too, as well. So you, in the immediate aftermath, Dr. Mardini, you did have to choose the option of immediate reconstruction, of some kind of reconstruction. We didn't go straight into a transplant.
So you can only imagine the defect that results from a blast injury like what we saw. So you're talking about no structure to the face whatsoever, nothing to hold saliva. The only thing that's left is really drooling. There's no nose. There's just a tongue. There's nothing around the tongue. So the whole central face is completely destroyed and non-existent. So you need to create structure there so that he can maintain somewhat of a normal life. Acute face transplant, performing it immediately afterwards, is a very complicated subject and story, and certainly at that time, that wasn't something anybody was contemplating. But you can imagine you need to make sure that the face transplant workup that we had in discussions with Andy went on for several years to make sure that this is something he can truly consent to, knowing what it is and what the consequences would be of the face transplant. And then a journey that he's willing to take. So that wasn't really a consideration for us at the time, going to an immediate face transplant. And then the preparation that we would need to have as a team to do it right requires a lot of time.
Andy, when we were preparing for this, it's so poignant to note, and this is one of the messages that you really are interested in talking about, is that as bad as it was leading up to the shooting, because of what then happened where you had a prosthetic nose and your mouth was much smaller, and there was a major deformity there, that you actually went down into even lower depression than you were at the moment when you tried to kill yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you think you have it rough, but then you get out of the hospital and you have to go back home and face, I'm from a small town of 3,000 people, and everybody knows me. Everybody knows what happened, and everybody's just, oh, what does he look like? How is he? Is he safe to be around, and all this stuff? And those are the questions that, there for, a little while I was just a hermit. You don't want to go out. You don't want to be seen because everybody's just trying to just see what you look like, and that hurts. I'll never forget, there was a guy. I went right back to work. I got out of the hospital in April, and I was back to work in May.
Doing what's your job?
Oh, I'm an electrician now, but then I was working with a family friend, Larry and Twyla. They're great people, working at like a restaurant, processing plant, stuff like that, RV park. But working there, and this guy that I knew comes up, he's just like, oh, well, he don't look that bad, and you could just tell that he was just coming up just to see what I look like. And so I had to deal with that. And there's obviously still the depression still there, and just my life has just changed. You lose trust with family and friends. It was hard, yeah, it was definitely hard.
There's kind of, and Dr. Josie, you work, your department, I don't know if that's the right word, if it's a department, but you work with people who have had transplants.
Yes.
And in some cases that means that they've had this deformity, and there's this voyeurism that contributes to the mental health as well.
Yeah, it's such a frustrating situation, that somebody has gone through such a difficult situation, and now they're, faced with individuals who are curious and react to them in ways that aren't very supportive. And we actually heard that. I was listening into the talks just before this session about a young person who's in a wheelchair and nobody will look at them, and how isolating it is, to have kind of something that's visible about you that makes you different. And so to be struggling with depression plus dealing with the burden of that is really a challenge, and it speaks to a lot of strength to be able to live with that.
I think there's a lot of mystery on the part of people who see someone who might be disabled or have a deformity to not know what to do.
Yeah.
Right. So not looking is a solution we might think as the polite solution.
Yeah.
Is it?
Well, I think that Andy might be better able to answer that question, but I think as our society thinks about disabilities or people who are different than us, we have to be sensitive to what would it be like to be in their shoes. And in England, they actually have a strong program for people who have, visual or facial injuries of various kinds, and how to be supportive of these people and not to, by feeling uncomfortable, kind of exclude them from society. And we probably need more efforts like that here in the US to make sure that we're not excluding people because they look different and just ignoring them.
What would you say, Andy? What was the biggest mistake people made in trying to deal with trying to be polite, I guess, is the nice way of putting it?
Well, you're going to have the people that are going to be jerks about it, and then you're going to have people that are, curious and inquisitive, and you're going to have the people that look away. And I think everybody would be different in saying that this is what I want, this is how I want to be treated. Mm-hmm. I was okay with everybody looking away. That's what I preferred, because then you don't have to make eye contact, and then, I look down, it's like, I just felt like a failure and a burden at that time.
So at what point did psychiatric help and mental health conversations, therapy come into your life?
It was during the transplant process. I should take that back. I've had, counseling since I was a kid. And, my parents saw it and they tried to get me on antidepressants at a young age, and I didn't like it. So then, kind of transformed out of it, didn't want it. And then, talking with Dr. Mardini, made the call about the transplant. He says, well, we want to help you. At this point I was just a candidate. I didn't know anything about it, nothing. So, and he just says, we want to help you help you. Like, no matter what happens, comes to this, whether you get the face transplant or not, we want you to be able to become the best person that you can be. And so it was in 2012.
I'm trying to remember.
Around that time, yeah, 2000,
It's a while ago.
2012.
Yeah, probably 2011.
Yeah,
You're talking about 2012 as the time when conversations began that a face transplant might be possible.
So you asked a question earlier about when face transplant started. At that time, around the 2006 time, it was just like what you had seen in the movies. Wow, this is something that's possible. And as we see patients that struggle with facial deformities, and we struggle and try to achieve anything close to normalcy, you start becoming more curious about this technology of face transplantation. So at some point around 2010, we started as a team to think really seriously about face transplantation and started to visit other centers that had done it. And at that point, when we came back, I called Andy and I said, can you come here? We need to talk. So he came, and the first conversation was, I just want to bring up this topic, and I don't want you to get too excited. It's face transplantation. It's something that's out there. I don't know if you're the right candidate for it. If I were you, I'm not sure if I would even want to do it. But as we're learning about it as a team, I want you to think about it as well.
What'd you think of that when he said that, Andy?
Oh, I was ecstatic. He's like, don't get excited. I'm like, I can't help it.
You wanted it.
You know, you live, you know, how I lived, and you just always have this, you want hope. I mean, you just have hope. You just hope that, you know, things are going to get better, hope that you can change yourself. And to me, this was the answer. And when he called in 2012, 11, 12, yeah, I'll never forget it. I'm in the living room with my mom and my sister, again, of course, because she lives in West Virginia, so it was just crazy she was there. And I just like, I'm like, Dr. Mardini? And my mom gasped. She's like, oh my God, you know, and it was amazing. And he's like, don't get too excited. I remember my dad telling me, don't get too excited, you know, we don't want you to get down. And I told my dad, I said, if I don't get excited about this, then I don't deserve the opportunity to do this. I said, this is something that means so much to me, to be able to just even be a candidate in.
I think it's a doctor's job to tell you not to get too excited. I mean, even when cancer goes into remission, they talk about 5-year rates and things like that. You can never let us have any fun with any kind of hope whatsoever.
Well, you think about the procedures that we do on a daily basis that have been performed 50,000 times in the past. It's the patient will say, I trust you to do this. You give them as much information as you can. You get the sense that they understand what they're doing, and you proceed. But with face transplant, at that time, there was only 30 that had been done.
30, you said?
30 transplants that had been, 28 or 30 at the time. And there, you know, it's extremely important for us as a team to make sure that Andy can have an informed decision, can make an informed decision. And how much information do you really need to make an informed decision on this kind of topic? So we had to continue to bring, to operate as a multidisciplinary team, which here at Mayo we're so strong at, and make sure that the surgeon isn't the one driving this just to do a surgery. So at that time, Dr. Josie and Dr. Amer and other members of the team started weighing in, social worker. Everybody had a big say in what Andy was going to go through, and everybody could stop the process and say, you may think things are going okay, but I've talked to Andy and it's not good. So
the team from the beginning included Dr. Josie, included psychiatry.
Yes.
That seems crucial, and it may seem that might not be how every face transplant is.
Well, the beginning of the care for the standard reconstruction included psychiatry, number one, because you're going to go through multiple surgeries, multiple hospitalizations on a patient who's got some illness. And then he was fine for several years, probably maybe doing something at home, I'm not sure, but I mean, seeing people at home, I wasn't involved. But then when he came back and we started talking about face transplant, we have a selection process, and at that point is when Dr. Josie got involved. And you can imagine the responsibility that Dr. Josie felt and others in her department trying to make an important decision like this. Are we okay to even think about face transplantation on someone who's tried to do this to themselves before?
So, general thoughts on that point in the process?
Well, for me, there's kind of two areas to think about. One is, is a patient psychologically prepared for going through a major surgery? But the other piece of it is you have to live with a transplant. And so I was fortunate that I'd been working with transplant patients for 20 years before we ever even considered this. And living with a transplant isn't an easy thing. You have to take medication every day. There's a lot of monitoring, and especially for such a new area, it's a lot for a patient to deal with, a lot of physical rehabilitation. So those were the two areas that I was thinking about from my perspective. I'm fortunate, though, that there are many colleagues around the world who graciously shared their expertise. We reached out to colleagues in Lyon, France, and Cleveland Clinic and others. And so going into this, I think all of us had spent a lot of time, learning from the world experience before we started with our efforts here.
So you had this moment of hope, Andy, when Dr. Mardini called you to say you might be a candidate. But again, the surgery still didn't happen for several more years. Did the wait, I'm just thinking of the wait, because if you reacted to the phone call saying, let's do it tomorrow, and it ends up taking several years, that could be part of adding to depression. What did you go through just on that wait?
Oh, there's lots of ups and downs. I mean, you're meeting with Dr. Mardini, Dr. Josie, Dr. Amir, the social workers, my nurse coordinators, all these other doctors coming in from France, and yeah, it was intense. And I remember just, Dr. Mardini was talking, I wanted to jump right into it, and he's like, whoa, slow down. We need to actually, make an informed decision. He was talking about trust, and we had sat down and talked. I said, Dr. Mardini, I trust you so much. I think you could just do it. He's like, well, that's just not the way that it works. We need you to start studying. We want you to do research on this. There's lots of possibilities. You're talking anti-rejection medications, side effects if the surgery doesn't go as planned. There's so many different things going into it. And I had my ups and my downs, and I'll never forget one time we came back from a meeting, and usually it was 3 days up here we would spend, and I came back and I'm just like, I don't want it. I just am done. This is just too much. I've put in so much time and effort and energy into this. And my dad looks at me, he's like, what are you doing? They're gonna throw this all away for them telling you, because it was all the side effects of the transplant. And that's just the whole time just seemed so negative. And I'm just like, I said, you're right, I'll give it another shot. Let's just try this again. Something came back the next time, and it was just, all the upbeat energy. And so it was hard, it was up, it was down. I was just thankful that I had my support network there, my dad, Larry and Twyla, my brother and sister, to be there to talk it out with them. But no, I think it made me more motivated to become this person. This is what I wanted, and with them saying, well, it's not going to be you. Don't get too excited. It's not. You're just a candidate. I was like, oh, but I'm the best one. So you guys.
But you weren't a yes the whole time. You were a no. You had moments of saying no. Let's not do this.
Yeah, I mean it's a big decision. I'm healthy. I was perfectly healthy, 28-year-old person, not mentally healthy, but physically in perfect health. There was nothing wrong with me. So, and then you take anti-rejection medication, and you start reading up about this, about kidney failure, and about all this stuff, and you're just like, man, this is, wow, I don't know. But you have to make an informed decision. And at the end of the day, we sat down with Dr. Josie, Dr. Amir, Dr. Mardini, and we made a list of the pros and cons of this surgery, and the things that I could do and the things that I couldn't do, the things that I wanted to do, and what this surgery would actually help me accomplish. And once we made that list, it was just, it really opens your eyes, and you can see, because I wasn't in it for looks, aesthetics, looks. I was in it for function. I wanted function more than anything.
Meaning what? Like
lips. I wanted functional lips, teeth, nose, all that stuff that actually worked, because you have a plastic nose that you take on and off and have to scrub with a toothbrush to keep it clean. And so I wanted a real nose, a real tongue, real mouth, real teeth, real lips. I wanted to be able to kiss my girlfriend, kiss my kids, my niece and nephew, and one of the big ones I wanted to do was go swimming. So, and we were able to accomplish that.
Tom, when you ask him about a weight, you're talking about a very serious weight. You're talking about 5 or 6 years. We didn't know if it was going to be longer. We didn't even have a program here where it's approved by the institution to perform it. He had to go through all the checks in the institution, including Dr. Josie, who I always tell her I deeply admire her for taking the hard road and saying yes to this. Because think about it, it's so much easier for the first face transplant in a situation like Andy's to say, probably not a good idea to do this as a first face transplant. So much harder to say, we're going to proceed, yet she did it. And she did it for the right reasons, because when you talk to Andy and you get to know him, you feel like it's someone who understands and someone who you want to give a second chance to.
You spent 50 Saturdays over a 3-year period planning for the surgery. So you spent 3 years coming in on Saturday planning. For those of us not in the medical world, is there a comparable surgery out there that takes 3 years of planning to perform?
Well, think about this, Tom. Andy didn't come to us asking for a face transplant. Andy came to us wanting to be normal. And so you're going to put him through a face transplant with the years and for the lifetime of immunosuppression. It's got to be worthwhile. You've got to have him achieve his goals, which are walking into a room, talking to people, and no one saying, what's wrong with you or what's going on. So you can imagine at the time where we finally got institutional approval from Mayo Clinic to do this, you can imagine the burden of responsibility that we felt as a team on the surgical side now to do this and do this right. So we went to the cadaver lab, initially just 2 or 3 people, studying the basic anatomy, things that face transplant is a combination of so many other things that we do on a daily basis, but to combine them into one surgery is different. So doing some anatomy studies and finally creating a defect like Andy's, and then rehearsing and growing the team and having everybody understand what we're doing and get everybody trained for it, it took that long.
The thing you think about when I was reading about this, and this gets into the complexity of the surgery, you never think about smiling. Your brain tells your face muscles to move, and the nerves react, and we smile. But without the face, the donor face is what I think a lot of people would know as the last mile, right? So you have to connect every nerve in Andy's face to the donor's nerve. You have to match it up so that maybe one day Andy can smile. I mean, I can't fathom the complexity of just making all those connections.
So what you consider to be a success in face transplantation will vary. I mean, having the flap or the face survive isn't really a success to our team. That's not what we considered a success. We thought if Andy would have a face that's alive and the tissues are healthy, and he couldn't smile, he couldn't close his lips, he couldn't feel any parts of his face, that wouldn't be a success at all. So in our cadaver dissections for the 3-year period that we were in the cadaver lab, we identified and dissected out every facial nerve branch that was on the 2 cadavers, the donor and the recipient. And in the surgery itself, we had the donor and all the facial nerve dissected. We took a picture of it and a video during the surgery and stimulated those nerves to see exactly what each nerve branch does. So one would be 80% smile, 20% lip, eyelid, and so on. And we did the same thing on the donor and our patient, Andy, the recipient, so that when we brought the 2 together, we knew exactly which nerve needs to go to the other nerve, so that when Andy thinks about smiling, he stimulates, like you said, the natural nerve for smiling goes to the donor nerve that does the same exact thing, and you get that functional outcome on the
Did you know it was
organ.
that complex, Andy?
Yeah, and I was blown away.
It's amazing. What were you doing at this time, Dr. Josie? Not even, yes, during the surgery, but even in the buildup. Like, what was your North Star in terms of being part of this team?
I guess it would be, similar to comments you made, that we really wanted this to be a success. And so everything we could do to set the stage for success. And there's a lot of things that transplant patients in general can do to be ready for a transplant and to do well with a transplant. And some of those things are just building up a mentally healthy life, such as using good coping strategies, being optimistic, having a good support network, having resilient role models, being a problem solver, being flexible. And we tested all of those things over years and years of preparation, and making sure that we were taking all the steps to treat any issues that needed to be treated. It was really a big moment. Just as somebody who's worked at Mayo for many years, never in my career have I ever seen so many people come together in such a large team. It was like being part of a symphony. And I have great respect for my surgical colleagues, Dr. Mardini, but also Dr. Amir, who's not on the stage right now, but deserves tremendous credit for organizing all the medical pieces that had to occur. We had strong support from Danielle Roos, our social worker, as well as colleagues in many other of our fields that were really supportive. So it was a huge team effort, and I was part of that team, and I'm eternally grateful for that opportunity.
So, Andy, for the transplant you had, it wasn't your forehead or your eyes, it was your nose and everything below, so your cheeks and your chin and down to your mouth.
Right.
What do you remember from going into surgery? What do you remember that build-up leading up to that moment when you're in the room?
Oh, in the hospital room?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I forget. I can't remember half of it. I was just so excited. I remember just sitting there. I'll never forget my dad. I traveled up there alone. And then my dad came up the next day on that Friday. He's like, "Hey, I'm lost. Where do I go?" I'm like, "I don't know." Like, find somebody.
He's lost in Rochester.
Yeah, he's always lost in the hospital. So I'm like, "I'm up on this floor." He's like, "I don't know how to get there." So we sent somebody down to go get him, and I just, we just embraced and just hugged. And, you go into this surgery, and this is a huge surgery, and you just have to think about, all the consequences that could happen. And just sitting in there, I'm just like calm, collective, ready to do this. Dr. Mardini comes in with the waiver form, and we're sitting there, we're just talking, we're laughing, we're having a good time. We're just both just collective. And we were both, I think at that time we had both prepared so much that when the time came, we were ready for it. Wheeling me down the hallway in the wheelchair, I'm looking at pictures of his family, and we're just laughing and enjoying time. And I remember laying down on the bed. I just said a little prayer, and I just prayed for myself, in Dr. Mardini's hands and touch, and he also prayed for the donor family because of what they're going through at this time. They just lost somebody that they loved, and it feels like a burden on myself sometimes, but I just, what they've given me has just been unbelievable, and if it wasn't for them, that we wouldn't be in this situation right now.
It was a man in southwestern Minnesota who shot himself and died, and that was the transplant. That was the face you got. We hear Dr. Mardini with heart transplants that you got to get it in the cooler, you got to do it within however many hours. Is it the same for a face transplant?
So on the other, we're talking about a major symphony and a big team. We have our whole other side of it with LifeSource, our organ procurement organization that actually coordinates organs. And we work with them for years doing the same thing, the processes for approval, but then training the staff. And one of the big points was we have a period of time like the heart transplants where we need to get it done within that period. But the complexity of this and the coordination of team, we wanted the donor and the recipient to be side by side, because it may be a given or something assumed for you, but the reality is, if you just accepted donors from one particular hospital, you may be waiting for 10 years to get that because it has to be matching other things, blood type and color and size and all these other things, gender. So we accepted from a broad region and planned to transfer the donor after the organs have been allocated to the teams. So once the donor was identified in another state, getting that the organs are allocated to the different teams, then that donor is transported to Mayo. You can imagine the complexity of transporting a gunshot wound patient across state lines. All of that was coordinated by incredible teams, Life Source and the coroner's office and things like that. So we had the fortune of having the donor and the recipient side by side.
In the room?
In 2 rooms side by side, working. We started around the same time. It took us 24 hours to prepare Andy's face, and it took us about the same time to procure the donor face. And at that point, we could just walk from one room to another. So we avoided that whole, what we call ischemia time. But what we do first is we start to connect the bones, and then we do the vessels. So there was a period of time where there wasn't any blood flow to the face. And during that period of time, it's not very comfortable. We were comfortable knowing that we were prepared to do things, but there's a lot of little things that can happen that can get in the way of making it the success that you want.
Some of those Life Source people, I believe, are here today. So
Meg Rogers and Susan Gunderson, a lot of incredible
for their
people.
efforts. Yeah.
I'm thinking about the job of an anesthesiologist during a surgery with a patient, and they don't necessarily do the mask anymore, but the patient doesn't have a nose. Like, I just think about all the heightened complexity for everyone in the room.
You know, one thing that I believe very strongly contributed to the success of our team effort is every single person in the team, from the surgeon to the medical person to the tissue typing lab to the photographer everybody felt critical to the success of this. They felt that they were doing this for the right reasons. Most of them had met Andy before. Probably between 50 and 100 people met Andy and wanted to help him. And they all had the patient in the middle, in the center of this focus, and they wanted to help him. So I think that helped. And so in our cadaver dissections, even the anesthetist, the nurse anesthetist, the anesthesiologist, they would stop by on some of those Saturdays just so that it's a routine thing, so that when the face is being procured, completely taken off, they're not feeling strange about this, that it's not just another thing. So our anesthesiologist, to keep Andy doing well for 56 hours and have him come out of it healthy, it's incredible. It truly is incredible.
So at some point, Andy, you woke up from this 56-hour surgery. Did you say thank God, or did you say, oh crap?
Again, 2-point conversation here. 2-part answer. When I first woke up, I'll never forget. I get up and I look at my dad sitting in the corner, and I look at him and I give him the 2-finger sign, and I went like this because I had the trach, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. He kept looking at me like, so I said, 2 days, this is coming out, we're going home. And, when you wake up, you're under heavy sedation, so you don't realize what's going on. You kind of know, I just had this big surgery. And then, you start to come out of it, 3-4 days later, and you can actually start to think. And I was so happy. I'm just like, Dr. Mardini would come in the room, and I couldn't talk at the time. I said, when can I see my face? And he's like, oh, not yet. Because everybody's coming in the room. Oh, you look great. You look incredible. I'm like, I just want to see it so bad.
Why didn't you let him see it?
Well, 56 hours of surgery plus 5 days of being completely out after that. So Andy was actually out for about a week.
Oh, wow.
And, so by the time he started waking up, it was hard to know, and Dr. Josie could speak more to that. We wanted him to be fully awake. We wanted his swelling to come down. We wanted the swelling around his eyes to come down. And Dr. Josie wanted to prepare him a little bit for the first time he gets to see himself with a new face. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to wait. And Andy was okay with it. That's the most important thing. So you can imagine no phone, so he can't even see himself in a reflection, no mirrors around. When he goes to the bathroom, the mirrors were covered, the windows were covered. To make that an actual reality that he doesn't see himself till that one moment he did 3 weeks later was not an easy challenge, and he was up for it.
3 weeks?
3 weeks.
So what was it like when you finally saw yourself?
I was blown away. I didn't expect it. I mean, so you go into there with, you know, your high hopes and high expectations, and when I first saw it, I never forget. I just looking in that mirror and I'm just like, wow. That's all I could say is wow. I was sitting there looking in the mirror and just looking at myself. I actually just went through the pictures the other day, looking at all the pictures of going through the hospital stuff, and it's just like, that was just such an amazing moment. There was so many people there with me. My family was by my side. My Mayo family was at the end of the bed, and just that moment, you just knew that all our hard work that everyone had put in came to fruition, and it was unbelievable. Yeah, it was awesome.
You know, I have to be honest, when we were putting this conversation together about a guy who had a face transplant and the mental health issues around that story, my immediate bias or whatever was that your mental health difficulties were now because the transplant, you know, it doesn't look the same as you looked before the accident, and that you would be having issues now after the transplant. But I'm completely wrong in that regard. The depression was in the time between the shooting and the transplant started bringing you back out.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, it's not, you have a face transplant, there's still things you have to work on. I mean, the depression's still going to be there, but yes, it definitely does help. And I take medication to deal with the depression, and I still have to work on myself. It's not like, oh, I have a transplant, see you later, everything's great, you're good to go. No, I mean, the things are still there, and you know, you have the regret still from the suicide attempt, and you have, you know, the failure that you let your family down, and it goes away, but it's still there. You just have to deal with it. And I look at myself in the mirror now. I'm myself. I'm not who I used to be. I'm not the person in between after the gunshot. I'm Andy right now. Those three people, you know, the three different faces were me. I always felt that, you know, your past helps forge your future. If you can't deal with what you've done in the past, then, you know, you don't really have a place in the future. So you have to embrace your past to be able to build upon it. And I've come a long ways from who I was at that moment in 2006 to who I am now. And you know, it wouldn't be possible without these people, you know, sitting right next to me, Dr. Mardini and Dr. Josie. My family, my friends have been by my side the whole time, throughout. It's not just, I mean, it's a long process, and it's been a long journey, and it's far from over. I still have a long ways to go, and I'm excited for what the future holds.
Andy, one of the things that I guess part of the therapy of this is, we all thought Andy was an introvert. You would see him, he'd always kind of be in the corner, not talking much. He doesn't really interact with others. And now he's in a room, he's the center of attention, he's talking to everyone, he's enjoying people, he's chatting in an elevator with people. And I think we all need people. And if you're isolating yourself from people, then you're suffering in life. And I think that's part of, and I'd love to hear, Andy, I never asked you this question, how much of that has to do that we've talked about related to kids as well.
Yeah, I mean, my girlfriend gets upset with me when I go out and I'm talking to the cashier. She's like, what are you doing talking to that guy? You don't even know. I'm like, I'm just learning who he is. I'm just curious, you know? And it's just who I am. I'm just that curious kid. And I like to meet people. I like to go out and explore. I like to do fun things. And I'll talk to anybody in the elevator. It doesn't matter who they are. And kids, you know, when you live with a facial deformity, you have to understand kids are kids, and they're going to say whatever they want. And you know, I have my niece and my nephew, and they have a friend come over. They think I'm perfectly normal. When I went into surgery, they're like, "Why did Uncle Andy have to have surgery?" They didn't understand really what was going on. But their friends would come over, and they'd be like, "Well, what is wrong with your uncle?" You know, and they're like, "They don't see it." So. But yeah, to your point, I guess when we really found the surgery a success was, I was going up to appointments on Charlton 9, and I'm in the elevator, and there's a mom with a kid in the stroller and a baby next to, or you know, a young kid next to her, And he comes around the corner, looks at me, and then just looks back. And right then and there, I went upstairs. I was so excited. I told everybody up at my appointment, I'm like, he'll never believe what just happened. And so that right there to me was, I'm back to I can be back to my normal self.
How much of this journey, Dr. Josie, is those kinds of milestones?
Yeah.
The first smile or the first time a kid just acts like normal. How much of that is in this journey of on the mental health side of things?
Yeah, it's such a learning experience for all of us because there have only been 35 face transplants done, I think, is that correct, in the world. So these little moments are so remarkable. I really think they're the grace moments of the grace notes of life. When you make these little tiny connections. I enjoyed the session just before this, and they were talking about micro joy. And I think that's micro joy right there, where you just have these little moments where you're connecting with people and you're feeling like yourself again. And I was thinking about something you said, Andy, about how you made a list of the goals that you had for yourself. I'm not sure that was on the list, but it's an example of how important these steps are in a journey. Some things you can't even imagine that could be better because you don't even realize how important they are, and then they come back into your life. We've been fortunate this last year to get federal funding to actually research people who've had hand and face transplants and ask them, questions about what were your goals? What were you hoping for? And how can we help people in the future who are getting hand and face transplants to know, is this worth it? How do you make the decision of whether you're going to put yourself through all this? And so we're grateful for anybody who's willing to offer their experiences because this is really unique. And when you talk about transform, this was a transformative experience, I think, for the entire medical team as well, I think, as Andy.
You went to the precipice, Andy, and you were in a state of depression, and you shot yourself. And then, as hard as it might be to imagine, it actually got worse. And now you've come through, and you are not Pollyannish about the fact that there's still a road ahead. But you have an audience here, and I know you want to communicate something to people about, getting to that low point in life. What do you want to share?
Yeah, I was nervous about this talk, and I called Dr. Josie on Tuesday, and I said, oh, look, Dr. Josie, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to say. She's like, so if I'm sitting out in the audience right now, and I'm looking up to this guy that's on stage that, tried to commit suicide, and I've had suicidal thoughts, and I'm sad, and I'm depressed, the thing I would say to myself is, you have to find these feelings, and you have to identify what these feelings are. And we've always talked about how getting this transplant, I didn't have all the tools to deal with what I was going through. And the one thing I can always say is that no matter what, don't do it, it's not worth it, absolutely not. But everybody will tell you that. But one thing I will say is that if you are feeling these thoughts and feelings, that you just need to get out there and you need to talk to someone. It doesn't matter who it is. It could be your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your family, a counselor. Just somebody has to know that you're feeling this way because nobody knows that. And that's the one thing that with me is I built up a wall and I wouldn't let nobody in. And then finally it just, got to that point where I just exploded and it was just, there was no controlling it. And it was just, I regret that day, and I hate the word regret more than anything. But I did it, and here I am on stage, and if I could just help one person to just reach out to somebody, and that's it, that's all I ask, is you just talk to somebody. And if I had a do-over, I wouldn't push the button yet. I wait, I still got a bunch of years left, so I'm gonna make more mistakes, but not the same ones. And, just going back to that day, just reach out and talk to somebody. That's it. It sounds simple, but it's very hard.
It is. And it's also interesting that it seems like the proof that it's not worth it is that after you did it and you lived, the first person who came to your help, that police officer, you said, I want to live.
Yeah, Ryan, I'll never forget that, and I made it a point too, once I got out of the hospital, and was back in my hometown to go and talk to him about that and apologize and just thank him for being there and just helping, hold and support me. You don't realize how many people are there to support you until you have a tragic event happen. And I think, us as a society, we've kind of gotten away. Here in Minnesota, I know in Wyoming, the culture's a lot different. There, you're more spread out from your family. I live 4 hours away from my closest family member. So it's different.
Dr. Mardini, how has your practice changed having had this chapter with Andy?
So I think, Andy tells us that we changed his life, but he definitely changed our lives. Yeah. First of all, from the psychosocial part, my family's been changed by this. You get to appreciate the small things that make a big difference. So, I love kids, and Andy loves kids. And what really touched me is he avoided kids because he hated the reaction that they had. He used to scare them. So he avoided them for that reason. And so the transplant has made that better for him. So from the psychosocial part, it's affected us quite a bit. From a surgical standpoint, I gave a talk once about our journey and our cadaver dissection, all this stuff. And one of the really experienced surgeons made a comment which I thought was really interesting. He said, "I'm curious to know the 50 Saturdays that you spent in the cadaver lab studying the anatomy of the face, how many other patients have benefited from that, from you and your team now knowing a lot more about the anatomy, that you did it for the face transplant, but in reality, every other surgery you do, you have a different kind of comfort level." So I think it's changed us from the anatomy standpoint. And honestly, the journey has been incredible, and Andy has made it incredible. You can imagine how much more pleasant this is having a partner like Andy be part of this, where he shares his stories with us. Any revision or any issue that we needed to deal with, he's always on board. Anything we ask him to do, he's always there. And he asked us one thing before the surgery is, give me time before I talk to anyone about this, before I'm asked any questions. But when the time is right, I can tell you that I want to be there. I want to help others, because I was a little surprised when you say you didn't find your calling, but you have changed a lot of people's lives. And you are the perfect story of second chances and hope.
Yeah.
Dr. Josie, what's the thing that's the biggest barrier for people to get help?
It's hard to answer that. I think there's a lot of different reasons. I think that when you're very down, you start to lose your sense of connections to people. Your mind turns in on itself. And when I'm rounding in the hospital with people who have a lot of depression, I almost feel like it's like they're turning in on themselves, and they can't really see the options that are open to them, the people who would help them. And so if you ever feel like that, if you ever feel yourself turning in and feeling like you can't think of a way to get better, to get help, take that as a sign of depression. If you have thoughts of suicide, don't think of that as just being not important. That's important. That's a sign of depression. And we should help. And there is help. Anytime you feel like that, you can go into an emergency room. Any emergency room is trained to help people who are feeling like that. I shared with you that there's a 1-800 phone number that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that you can call anytime if you need help. Let your friends know. Don't be embarrassed. Nowadays, people are beginning to recognize that mental health is just health. It's just part of your body. Your brain is part of your body. So you need to, if you have a symptom, reach out and get help. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you have a character flaw. It's just something that we know is part of the science of medicine. You just need to let yourself get help. Stay connected to people. Try to maintain optimism. Try to live a healthy life to help buffer you from the stresses and strains of life. But everybody potentially could have depression. About a quarter of all Americans have depression. And some people who don't have depression act in a suicidal way. So it's that kind of thinking. If you start to have suicidal thinking, reach out for help.
Sheila, is it true that many of the attempted suicide are spur of the moment, not premeditated?
Right.
And how do we factor that into thinking about depression and suicide?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I was just reading some recent research about suicidal kind of behavior. And so somebody could come into a doctor's office and not mention that they're having suicidal thinking. But what they might be having is just a feeling of restlessness and anxiety, of feeling like they don't know what to do. They're kind of, anxious and feeling like there are no choices. And so it's this combination of anxiety, not having choices, and maybe being down. So we're now beginning to think maybe it's not just hearing the word suicide, but watching for that combination of symptoms. And it's those combinations of symptoms that may then lead to a sudden act. And that's why a lot of medical societies and even countries are thinking about how people can suddenly access means of harming themselves, like guns. In some countries, there are other common means of people harming themselves. And we want to put some barriers between suddenly feeling distressed and then acting in just a second. In just 1 second, you can act in a way that will just be devastating. So those are some of the things we're thinking about in the field of psychiatry.
Dr. Mardini, it's a complete coincidence, but we're having this talk at the same time as we're seeing that there's news that a woman who had a face transplant earlier than Andy, that it's failing, that it's starting to fail, and that there's the possibility that sometime the donor face only lasts 10 or 12 years. What do we do with that, and what might Andy's journey include, in the future, knowing that?
So the challenge right now is there hasn't been a face transplant recipient who's had a success for his face for longer than 10 years. That in no way does that mean that it's not going to last more than 10 years, but that's what we see right now. But we know very well that transplants can last 40 to 50 years. And the face has some characteristics that's different than a heart or a kidney. The skin is a little bit different than the kidney tissue and things like that. But a lot of the same variables can be controlled. So number one, patient selection. It's extremely important that the right person goes through the checks to get to the final listing point. Second point is accepting the right donor, making sure that there's that you've matched things as much as possible, so there's not a lot of issues with the donor fighting the recipient and the other way around. Making sure that the patient is healthy when they start the process of surgery, which Andy was. Making sure that the level of immune suppression is constant. If you have immune suppression down, the body's going to fight the organ. Once that fight starts, there's a good chance you're going to lose. And if you don't lose immediately, you're going to lose in the long term if you have one of those little battles where you have these acute episodes of rejection over time. So Dr. Amer, who's really he's the person that's keeping Andy doing well, besides Andy himself, is constantly checking on Andy, making sure the labs are okay, and Andy's doing his part as well. So I think those are the things that are controlled. We hope that this will last for Andy's for many, many, many years, way beyond 10 years.
But you're aware that that's a possibility, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, as we're going into it. I actually spoke with Dr. Amir earlier this afternoon about this exact situation, and we talked about, the positive cross match. So I'm very comfortable where I'm at.
So how are Christmases for you?
Amazing. Yeah, I love Christmas. It's my favorite time. I love to give gifts. So.
Because this happened originally around Christmas, right?
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, it's a rough time of the year. But you can't just focus on the past. I always focus on the future, and of course, it's there in the back of my mind. But yeah, I don't try not to think about the as much. And
Well, I want to thank you very much for being here and for telling your story. Andy Sandness and Samir Mardini and Sheila Josie Gregoire. Thank you for sharing this story and being with us here today.
Thank you.